Imagine you're a merchant in ancient times. You're somewhere in your 30s, you've worked hard, traded wisely, and built a comfortable life. You're sailing your ship from Phoenicia from what is today the coast of Lebanon, carrying a cargo of purple dye. Purple dye was worth its weight in gold in the ancient world. This is a valuable consignment. This voyage is important. And then the storm hits. The ship goes down, the cargo is lost. Everything you built, everything this voyage represented, gone in the span of just a few hours, somewhere in the waters between Phoenicia and Athens. You wash up on a beach. You have your life, you have the clothes on your back, but that's all you have. Most people in that moment would begin the long, painful job of rebuilding what they had, going back, starting again, trying to recover the thread of life the storm had interrupted. But this merchant did something else entirely. He walked to Athens. He found a bookshop. He picked up a text by Xenophon, a record of the life and teachings of Socrates. He read it then and there in the shop. And when he finished, he turned to the bookseller and asked, "Where can I find men like this?" The bookseller happened to glance out of the door at the precise moment the philosopher Socrates of Thebes was walking past in the street outside. He pointed and said, "Follow that man." The merchant did, and from that moment, from a shipwreck, a bookshop, and a stranger walking past at the right moment, Stoicism was born. The merchant's name was Zeno of Citium, and his story is one of the most extraordinary origin stories in the history of human thought. Welcome back to the Stoic Mind Mechanic. I'm Tim Howell. If you're joining us for the first time, this episode is the second in the series. The channel is a deep exploration of Stoic philosophy, its origins, its core principles, and how we can apply it practically in modern life. The first episode is probably the best place to start, and I'll put a link in the description, but this episode will also stand on its own. Today we're going to go back to the beginning, to Athens around 300 BC, and to the man who started it all. We'll look at who Zeno was, what he actually taught, and the world he was teaching into, and what the founding story of Stoicism tells us, even now, about what the philosophy is really for. Zeno was born around 334 BC in Citium, a city in the island of Cyprus. It had strong Phoenician cultural roots. His father, Menelaus, was a merchant, and by trade and temperament Zeno followed in that path. The ancient biographer Diogenes, who's the main source of Zeno's life, writing some 5 centuries after the fact, so we will take the details with appropriate care, tells us that Menelaus used to bring Zeno Socratic and philosophical books from Athens as souvenirs. So the appetite for ideas was there from an early age, and now that's a detail worth thinking about. A merchant father from a trading household, books brought home from intellectual centres as gifts. This isn't the background we typically associate with a founding philosopher. Zeno was not an aristocrat, not a student of the established Athenian academies. He was an outsider, geographically, culturally, and socially. And then the shipwreck. The ancient accounts place it during a voyage to Athens, though the precise date and route are uncertain. What all accounts agree on is the consequence. Zeno arrived in Athens with nothing, encountered philosophy, and never left. He studied first under Socrates, the Cynic philosopher he'd been pointed toward in the bookshop. The Cynics were radical. They rejected social convention entirely, lived in deliberate poverty, and prized virtue above all else. You can hear the Cynic influence in early Stoicism, the insistence that virtue is the only genuine good, that external circumstances can't touch the person of good character. Zeno found cynicism too extreme, too contemptuous of ordinary human life and social obligation. He went on to study under other teachers, Stilpo of Megara, Xenocrates and Polemon, absorbing logic, epistemology, ethics. He was a voracious, eclectic student for many years before he became the teacher himself. When he did begin teaching, probably around 300 BC, he chose a location that would define his school's identity forever: the Stoa Poikile. In Greek, this translates as the painted porch. It was a public colonnade on the north side of the Athenian agora, the central marketplace, the social and civic heart of the city. Its walls were decorated with famous paintings depicting scenes of Athenian military glory. Zeno didn't teach in an academy. He didn't rent a private lecture hall or restrict his audience to paying students. He taught in a public space, open to anyone who walked past and chose to stop and listen. Merchants, craftsmen, slaves, foreigners, citizens, all were welcome. This isn't an accident, it's a statement. Plato had his academy, a prestigious private garden outside the city walls associated with aristocratic intellectual life. Aristotle had his Lyceum. These were institutions of the established educated class. Zeno, the outsider from Cyprus, the shipwreck merchant, the man who had come to philosophy through loss rather than privilege, chose a porch, a public walkway, a place where the philosophy was available to anyone with the curiosity to hear it. His followers became known simply as the people of the Stoa, or Stoics, the name of one of the most important philosophical traditions in Western history. Came from a roofed walkway in the Athenian marketplace. There's something very right about that. A philosophy born from shipwreck, developed in public, available to all, not just to those with leisure and privilege. From the very first days, Stoicism carried with it a democratic universal impulse. The idea that the examined life was available to anyone, regardless of status, wealth or origin, and we'll return to that impulse and what happened to it when we meet Epictetus, a man who came to Stoicism as a slave. Here we have to be honest about a significant historical problem. Almost nothing that Zeno wrote has survived. We have some titles, works called On Human Nature, On Living in Accordance with Nature, On the Passions, On Law, but the texts themselves are lost. What we do have are fragments, quotations and summaries preserved in later writers, especially Diogenes, Cicero and the Stoic emperor himself, Marcus Aurelius. So when we talk about what Zeno taught, we're doing a reconstruction. It is a careful reconstruction based on the best available records, but there could be some artistic license. So with that said, here are the 4 core pillars of what Zeno established. The first pillar: philosophy as a complete system. Zeno divided his teaching into 3 parts: logic, physics and ethics, and critically he insisted these were not separate disciplines but a unified whole. The way the Stoics put it, logic is the wall that protects the garden, physics is the soil and ethics is the fruit. You can't properly understand how to live, the ethics, without understanding the nature of reality, the physics, and without the tools to reason clearly, the logic. This is quite a profound insight that modern philosophy often loses. Good thinking and good living are not separable projects. His second pillar, virtue is the only genuine good. This is the most radical and distinctive claim in all of Stoic philosophy. External things such as health and wealth, status, pleasure, and even life itself are not genuine goods. They are, in Stoic terminology, preferred indifference. We quite reasonably prefer to have health over illness and wealth over poverty, but here's the critical point. Their presence or absence can't make us happy or unhappy in any fundamental sense. Only virtue can do that. Why? Because virtue is the only thing entirely within your own power. The only thing that can't be taken from you by shipwreck, illness, politics, upheaval, or the cruelty of others. On his third pillar, living in accordance with nature, for Zeno, the good life meant living in accordance with your nature as a rational social being, not in the sense of living simply or close to the earth or hugging trees, though there are elements of that, but in the sense of fully expressing what is most distinctively human, our capacity for reason and our embeddedness in community. And for his fourth pillar, the unity of virtue, Zeno taught that the virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance are not separate qualities that a person might have in varying degrees. They are aspects of a single underlying state. The disposition of a person whose reason is aligned with nature. You can't truly have one without the others. So these four pillars, the unified system, of virtue as the sole good, living according to nature, and the unity of virtue, are the foundations. Everything else in Stoic philosophy is built on top of them. So what was Zeno like as a person? The ancient accounts paint a consistent picture. He was spare in his habits. Diogenes tells us that he subsisted on bread, honey, and small amounts of wine. He wore a thin cloak, the kind of minimal dress associated with the Cynics, even in winter. He was not interested in the trappings of wealth or status. He was also, apparently, somewhat reserved socially, preferring small gatherings to large ones, and in larger groups tending to position himself on the edge rather than at the centre. Not unfriendly, but deliberate about where and with whom he invested his attention. He was sharp. The fragments that survive are often witty, precise, and occasionally acerbic. When asked why he smiled more readily at young people than at older ones, he apparently replied, "Because young people can still change." He was also, by all accounts, genuinely consistent. He practiced what he taught. This is worth noting because the history of philosophy is full of brilliant thinkers whose lives were a poor advertisement for their ideas. Zeno seems to have been the real thing. He taught in Athens for decades, and according to all accounts was held in remarkable regard, not just by his students but by the city itself. The Athenians awarded him a golden crown and a state burial, citing his influence on the young people of the city towards virtue and self-discipline. His death, as recorded by Diogenes, has a poetic quality that's almost certainly embellished, but it's too good not to share. He died at a great age, having left the school one day. He stumbled and fell, apparently injuring his toe. He lay there for a moment, looked upward and said, "I come of my own accord. Why then do you call me?" And then he died. Whether or not that's historically accurate, it captures something true about the Stoic ideal. Death is a door you walk through deliberately, not a wall that falls on you without warning. We'll come back to that when we spend a full episode on the Stoic practice of memento mori. I want to come back to the shipwreck because I think it's more than an interesting biographical detail. I think it's a template. There is a school of thought, held by some ancient Stoics and explored by modern scholars, that the shipwreck was not accidental to Zeno's philosophy. That the experience of sudden total loss is precisely what made him capable of founding it in the first place. Think about what the shipwreck did. It stripped away every external thing Zeno had built his life around. His cargo, his livelihood, his plans, his sense of what the future held. In one storm, all of this was gone. And what remained? He did. His mind, his capacity for reason, and his ability to choose what to do next. The philosopher Pierre Hadot, one of the greatest modern scholars of ancient philosophy, wrote about what he called the philosophical conversion, the moment when a person stops living by habit and assumption and suddenly sees their life as a genuine question, a question that requires an answer. The shipwreck was Zeno's philosophical conversion. It was the moment his life stopped being a given and became a choice. And here's what I find most striking. He didn't choose safety. He didn't choose to rebuild what he'd lost as quickly as possible and return to that life. He chose philosophy. He chose the examined life. Not because it was comfortable or secure, but because having lost everything external, He had discovered something internal, something the storm couldn't touch. The oracle at Delphi, when asked about Zeno, reportedly said he should take on the colour of the dead, meaning commune with the ancient writers and thinkers rather than the living. It's a fragment of a story, but it points to something real. Zeno had found in the ruins of his merchant life something more valuable than purple dye. He'd found a question worth spending a life on. How should a person live? And his answer, virtue, reason, community, the examined inner life, has been the most enduring answer to that question that the Western world has produced. Before I let you go, I want to leave you with a thought that I've carried with me since I first encountered Zeno's story. The ancient world had a word for what happened to Zeno's ship. They called it, in Greek, a Sumphora, a catastrophe, a coming together, a confluence of bad events, something that descends upon you. And the Stoics, building on Zeno's experience, developed a specific response to the Sumphora. Not denial, not post-positivity, not the instruction to stop feeling bad about it, but a genuine philosophical framework for asking, given that this has happened, given that it cannot be undone, what now is within my power? What can I choose? What can I build from here? That question, asked by a shipwrecked merchant on a beach in the ancient Mediterranean, is the question at the heart of every episode that we're going to make together. Your reflection for this episode, if you'd like one, think of a moment in your own life when something was taken from you. Not necessarily dramatically, it doesn't have to be a shipwreck. And ask what remained. What did that loss, despite itself, reveal about what was actually yours all along? In the next episode, we meet Zeno's successors, Cleanthes, the former boxer who worked as a water carrier by night to fund his philosophical studies, and Chrysippus, the systematic genius who turned Zeno's insights into one of the ancient world's most complete intellectual edifices. Two extraordinary men. Two extraordinary stories. If today's episode was useful to you, please like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel to reach the people who might need it. And if someone in your life is going through their own kind of shipwreck, this might be the moment to share it with them. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.